Welcome to the Ledger, where we will be discussing on The Inventor Who Lied, the true story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. In Silicon Valley, where billion-dollar dreams are born overnight, one woman promised to revolutionize medicine forever. A drop of blood, a simple test, instant results. Elizabeth Holmes wasn't just selling a product, she was selling hope. But behind the billion-dollar facade was a tangled web of lies, fear, and deception. This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, the youngest self-made female billionaire who risked it all and lost. Elizabeth Ann Holmes was born in Washington, D.C. in 1984 into a family of privilege. Her father, Christian Holmes, was a vice president at Enron, before its infamous collapse, and her mother, Noelle Holmes, worked in government foreign policy. From an early age, Elizabeth was told she was special, destined for greatness. At Stanford University, she studied chemical engineering and interned at the Genome Institute in Singapore, working on SARS testing. It was there she noticed something. Traditional blood testing was slow, expensive, and painful. There had to be a better way. Or so she thought. In 2003, at just 19 years old, Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford. She used her tuition money to start a company she would later name Theranos, a combination of therapy and diagnosis. Her dream, to create a device that could run hundreds of tests on just a few drops of blood. Holmes was charismatic. She spoke with conviction, dressed in black turtlenecks like her idol Steve Jobs, and lowered her voice to sound more authoritative. Investors, politicians, and celebrities were enchanted. Her pitch was simple: no more needles, no more fear. Just a finger prick. Instant lab results. It sounded like magic. Big names fell in line, including former Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, and media titan Rupert Murdoch. Theranos raised over $700 million. At its peak, the company was valued at nearly $9 billion, and Holmes herself was worth over $4.5 billion, on paper. But there was a problem: the technology didn't work. Inside Theranos, the atmosphere was toxic. Employees were divided into silos, barred from talking to each other about their work. NDAs were mandatory. If you asked too many questions, you were fired, or worse, threatened with lawsuits. The machine, known internally as the Edison, was supposed to test for over 200 conditions. In reality, it could barely perform a handful, and often, the results were dangerously inaccurate. Whistleblowers like Tyler Shultz, grandson of board member George Shultz, tried to speak out. But Theranos lawyers, led by aggressive attorney David Boies, worked hard to silence critics. In 2015, investigative journalist John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal began asking questions Theranos couldn't answer. Despite immense pressure, including threats from Holmes' legal team, Carreyrou published a damning exposé. The technology was a fraud. The public began to turn. Regulators moved in. The Centers for Medicare-Medicaid Services, CMS, found serious deficiencies at Theranos labs. Walgreens, once Theranos' proud partner, quickly severed ties. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, charged Holmes and Theranos with massive fraud. Investors who had poured millions into the dream lost everything. In 2018, Holmes and former COO, and her secret romantic partner, Sunny Balwani, were charged with multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. At trial, Holmes portrayed herself as a visionary undone by ambition, claiming Balwani had emotionally abused her, an accusation he denied. The prosecution argued that Holmes knew the technology didn't work and lied anyway to investors, doctors, and patients. In January 2022, Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of fraud and conspiracy. In November 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in prison. Balwani received an even harsher sentence, nearly 13 years. Elizabeth Holmes, once hailed as a revolutionary, became a convicted criminal. Theranos was not just a failure of technology. It was a failure of accountability. In Silicon Valley, where "fake it till you make it" is practically a religion, Elizabeth Holmes took it to the extreme. But healthcare isn't social media. In medicine, mistakes cost lives. Holmes' story is a cautionary tale about blind ambition, hubris, and the culture of hype that still defines much of the tech world today. It forces us to ask hard questions. Why didn't investors demand proof? Why did powerful men and women ignore red flags? And how many other startups today are building empires on illusions? Elizabeth Holmes may be behind bars, Theranos may be dead. But the culture that created them, the hunger for disruption at any cost, is very much alive. In the end, Holmes didn't just sell faulty blood tests, she sold a lie. And for years, the world bought it. If you found this investigation valuable, consider subscribing. What do you think is the biggest lesson from the Elizabeth Holmes saga? Let's talk about it in the comments.